keeping you up to speed on all your Colorado teams. It's time for Coffee Break.
Mock draft season in the NFL waits for no one, not even the playoffs, as we've got the early renditions of ESPN's Mel Kiper Jr. and others around the Professional Football Writers Guild who are putting out their first mock drafts. And an interesting name, one that I'm sure every single one of you is familiar with, is an early projected favorite to land with the Broncos. We also got some exciting news about Pat Surtain, some not so exciting news about Val Nichushkin, which we'll get into in a little bit. And the Nuggets, frankly, didn't deserve to have to share the court with the Philadelphia 76ers with how badly they thrashed their rival last night. We'll get into all of it with my friend Jake Shapiro here. Jake, how are you, man?
I'm good. Finally stayed warm throughout the weekend, and here we are, Richie. We are upon a great sports week. You know, one of the best parts about my job is kind of like our Swiss Army knife pinch hitter, do everything kind of guy. Is last night I stayed up all night till 7 a.m. to watch Alcaraz Nikola versus Novak Djokovic.
Okay.
And I don't know how many people saw that tennis match, but I'd highly recommend watching the tennis Thursday night, because we're going to get some really good tennis between Sinner and Djokovic. I know people don't want to hear it, but right now, best American men's tennis class we have had since Roddick. Shelton's in the semifinals of the Australian Open. Fritz made a major final last year. Like, we are going to get a major slam winner here really soon, Richie.
Wow. Okay. Well, maybe we'll have to catch up on that at some point this week, because admittedly, I was not. I stayed up late to watch the Nuggets, and I stayed up a little bit later to watch some Colorado Buffaloes hoops action that I wanted to touch on with you a little bit. But I did not catch the tennis, so I will save that for another time. In the meantime, as I mentioned at the start of the show, it's already mock draft season. The NFL playoffs are not finished. We've reached conference championship matchups. But that doesn't stop the draft pundits and the talking heads and the likes of Mel Kiper Jr. and others to put out their initial projections for the season. And if you take a look at Mel Kiper's debut mock draft, we see some familiar faces out of Boulder and a very familiar face around the college football landscape landing in Denver at number 20, that being running back Ashton Jeanty. So if you go down the list there, the Tennessee Titans go Cam Ward out of Miami over Shedeur Sanders. And it's kind of been that, just as it was during the Heisman race, between the two quarterbacks, at least. There was flip-flopping between the two, and now it appears that Cam Ward is projected to go ahead of Shedeur. Second, the Cleveland Browns take wide receiver cornerback Travis Hunter over Shedeur Sanders, even though you would imply, or you would at least plausibly assume, that Cleveland could be in the quarterback market with Deshaun Watson and the nightmare that continues to be, and Jameis Winston becoming a free agent. Shedeur lands in New York with the Giants, the big market that Dion has repeatedly said he'd be okay with his son landing in. As you go down the list, at 14, the Indianapolis Colts take Tyler Warren, the star tight end out of Penn State, a name that's been linked to the Broncos since tight end is another position of need. Ashton Jeanty going there at 20, which means that the Broncos chose him over the likes of a guy like Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State, one of the top wide receivers in the draft, and the other stud tight end that's going to probably go in the first round being Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Jake, what is your initial reaction to? Let's just go. We'll start at 1 and we'll move our way back. Are you buying the smoke that has been kind of burning for a little while now, that Cam Ward is surpassing Shedeur Sanders as the top quarterback that will be taken off the board, even if Mel Kiper and others have ranked Shedeur as a prospect higher than Cam Ward?
No. And I'm working off some pretty good information here as I'm tied to some stuff going on, obviously, at the University of Colorado
Very
Boulder.
much so.
The Tennessee Titans fired basically their entire front office 2 weeks ago, and it was that front office who was linked to Cam Ward in the University of Miami. That front office, a bunch of former Hurricanes and a bunch of former Florida Gators, very much did favor Cam Ward over Shedeur Sanders. But there was some sort of dispute where it took a couple extra days after the season to fire those guys. Now, a lot of people are kind of putting 2 and 2 together and assuming that has something to do with the draft and believing Shedeur Sanders is going to be the number 1 pick with the Tennessee Titans. I am personally one of the people that believe that. Until today, Richie, because not Mel Kiper Jr., but the new Titans president of football operations, Chad Brinker, at today's press conference said, before introducing his general manager, We won't pass on a generational talent with the first pick in the NFL draft. Now, who does that sound like is going to go number one?
Admittedly, it probably doesn't sound like Cam Ward out of Miami. It could be a Travis Hunter as a generational talent. And I would think if you were talking about quarterback, I would think that Shedeur presents more of the flashy upside than a guy like Cam Ward, who was kind of speculated up and down. Similar to the way that Dylan Gabriel was talked about, where it's like, okay, his team's undefeated, but is he really kind of the driving engine behind it?
Yeah, and for me, Richie, I'm not the biggest Cam Ward guy. I mean, the stats are incredible. I saw him at Washington State last year, was really good even in the Pac-12, just didn't reach that highest level. He's the best quarterback in Miami Hurricanes history over a single season, which says a lot because that's an awesome football program. The turnover numbers with the fumbles, that's the key to look at. A lot of people only look at the interceptions, but he was a big fumbler. I'm not of the believer that either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders is a generational player.
I think that's fair.
And that's a high bar to reach. But the guy who just won the Heisman, doing something we've never seen before.
Undoubtedly a generational talent.
Correct. So I do think that if there was ever a year to take a non-quarterback number one, it's a guy who literally plays two different positions and can probably do it in the NFL.
In a widely considered weak quarterback class. Too.
Correct.
This isn't 2018, where we saw 5 quarterbacks go in the first round. We saw 6 go last year.
I would have ranked Shedeur after Bo last year personally, but probably in front of Penix. I mean, maybe it would have been head and head with Penix. But to me, you can get a guy at number 1 who would have been at number 17 in the quarterbacks last year, or number 7 in quarterbacks, but 17 in the draft or so.
Interesting. Well, again, let's just keep going down that list there. So in your world, and I really appreciate, I hadn't seen those comments from the Tennessee Titans with some of that stuff. So before we keep going down the list, let's just say Travis Hunter does go number 1 overall as the generational talent that the Titans' new front office is promising. Then you would have to wonder if Cleveland still chooses to pass on a quarterback if that generational talent, if you've got Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, again, a weak quarterback class, but I can't imagine anyone in the city of Cleveland, in the state of Ohio, definitely within that Browns organization, wants to keep Deshaun Watson where he's currently at. And you've got Jameis Winston now, who actually, in the most Jameis Winston way possible, showed them some pretty awesome highs and some pretty significant lows. It just feels like there's got to be a movement there. So that would be a fascinating twist if Cleveland decided to, if they have both of those guys on the board, what they would decide to do.
To me, Pandora's box absolutely opens if Shedeur Sanders is on the board at number 2 for the Cleveland Browns. I think it's pretty evident based off of what Deion Sanders has said over the last 15 months that he does not want his son to play for an organization like the Cleveland Browns. This is all publicly on the record.
Yeah.
So putting 2 and 2 together and what the Cleveland Browns are, I do think they need a rookie quarterback. I just do think they need that in order to move forward, move past the Deshaun Watson thing. I don't think Jameis Winston's part of their future. I mean, they already moved on from him at the end of last season. So it's my belief that they are going to go quarterback. And I think they also rate Shedeur Sanders as widely rated above Cam Ward. So if Travis Hunter does indeed go to the Tennessee Titans, this is the scenario of the Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers trade, or of, the John Elway situation we had here in Denver. So that's where things really can muddy up in this draft. Correct.
Yep. The calling of the bluff in the sense that it's been pretty vocal, as John Elway was, as Eli Manning was, as Deion Sanders has been on behalf of his son, that he will not play for certain organizations. And then it's incumbent on the organization to say, we'll see how true you are to your word, and we're going to take you anyways. Or I guess you go with a lesser prospect like Cam Ward, or the ultimate Pandora's box situation, you allow a team to trade up into the top 2 and amass draft picks and try to address it.
Well, for the Browns, it makes as much sense to just amass more future talent and really kickstart your rebuild as much as it does.
You got to pay Deshaun anyways.
Correct. So there's 2 scenarios for the Browns, basically. It's just amass draft talent for the future and admit your rebuild and say bye-bye to Myles Garrett, or try to make one kind of Hail Mary ditch attempt with striking on a rookie quarterback who rates worse than last year's class, but hope that you capture something that Jaden Daniels did in Washington this year.
What would you rate the Broncos' top 3 positions of need that need to be addressed in the offseason in general, but let's focus on the draft for sure, because it depends positionally when's the best place or the best time to address those needs.
Yeah, I'm someone who believes that the Broncos need another guy on defense. I'm not exactly sure what position. I do think that they could use another cornerback after all this. I wouldn't use a high quality thing on a cornerback because they have used some assets there. They obviously need some help, I think, at safety. Their linebacking core, I think, was better than expected, but I believe they probably need just more of a run stuffer. They got killed at the end of the season, their defense, Richie, particularly in that Cincinnati game.
The middle of the field. Yeah, the middle of Mike Gesicki looked like a prime George Kittle going for almost 200 yards in the first half like he did to the Broncos.
Broncos haven't been able to cover a tight end in a decade.
Nope.
Like we've seen it over and over. So getting a guy, especially when Brock Bowers is in your division, I know Kelsey's at the absolute end, but if you're going to make the Super Bowl, you still got to go through that guy. And if he retires, Noah Gray had an awesome year for Kansas City. So look around your neighbors, as Cecil says.
Just as we've seen, by the way, on Kelsey, he may be nearing the absolute end, but just like Gronkowski did toward the end and like Kelsey's proving to do, with a few minutes left in the fourth quarter in a tight game, Travis Kelsey is just as clutch as any tight end younger than him in the league.
Correct. So for me, and then the Chargers have some interesting guys at tight end. So just around you, there's 6 tight ends you're probably going to play a year that are pretty solid guys. So I think that for me is one of the top 3 of just addressing someone who can help in the run game and maybe guard tight ends is in that class. Whether you want to call it a nickel cornerback, an oversized nickel, a safety that does some multiple things, or a linebacker. Their edge rushers are finally fixed. Their edge rushers, I'm sold on that. But then you look on the offensive side of the ball. And I think everyone in Denver knows that this is the offseason of getting Bo Nix weapons. And for me, Richie, the 2 biggest weapons that Bo Nix needs is a wide receiver to go on the other side of Cortland Sutton, and one that is reliable and more of a star standout guy than a run-of-the-mill guy. And Troy Franklin proved nothing this year, that he is not just another guy. Marvin Mims has been pretty much just another guy outside of the return game. And, Vele, I'm not putting much stock into as a late round pick. So I think that they need a pass catcher. I more think wide receiver than tight end. I think that in Sean Payton's historic offenses that were in New Orleans, Jimmy Graham sticks out, but they weren't a tight end heavy team. So I more lean towards the wide receiver position. And then running back, they need a clear workhorse in that room. I know Sean Payton's already talked about how they want a multiple amount of guys that can do different things, and they want kind of a contingency group there. But to me, I think they need their number 1 running back, and Javonte Williams sadly is not that guy post knee surgery. Correct. So they need their 1 running back. I think Estime can do some good things. I think McLaughlin could do some good things. I think Bidet can do some good things, but you need the guy who you can rely on 70% of the time. I'm not wasting a first round draft pick on it personally, but I might attack it with a veteran in free agency, particularly for pass protection alongside Bo Nix.
I will tell you that I am of the same mind. I think that this will not be a repeat of 2018 where the Broncos have a clear need on the offensive side of the football, albeit in that situation it was quarterback, and they pass on Josh Allen infamously because Bradley Chubb, who they never expected to be there, was there. One of Elway's biggest regrets in his entire post-playing career, if not the biggest. And I do think that while I will admit that the conventional wisdom has stated for a good chunk of the last decade or so in the NFL, that investing first-round draft capital on a running back is a risky proposition. I'm definitely not of the mind that a first or even a second-round pick should be used at a position of where your goal is depth. I think you need to be drafting starters in the first 2 rounds, and that supersedes potential depth options. But I think this year, largely on the shoulders of Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, both running backs who are cast aside by teams that refuse to pay them another big contract, have rewritten some of that narrative. If you look at the teams that are remaining in the postseason now, and especially it was even more evident at the start of the postseason when you could line up the likes of Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon and Brian Robinson Jr. and Aaron Jones and Josh Jacobs. It really showed you that all of the postseason teams, by and large, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in Detroit.
I mean, look at Washington's backfield. Those are veterans in Brian Robinson,
Austin Eckler.
and Austin Eckler.
Yeah. So it showed you that the common thread between those
James
postseason
Cook's
teams,
a veteran.
Exactly. So it showed you that the common thread between those teams was that they all had made a commitment to and succeeded in finding an above average postseason caliber running back to help fuel their offense. And I think that's breathed a little bit of life back into the importance of that position. Whereas before it felt like it was leaning more toward it's a passing league. You can get by with a committee of guys, blah, blah, blah. The Broncos are really the outlier in a team that just couldn't figure out a way to do it. So I think that for Bo Nix, the ability to put a solid run game around him, and yes, also help in the advent of pass protection and things like that, to me, that feels like the number one need. You can say that, yeah, they need a one outside of Courtland Sutton, who in my opinion has had his career extended or kind of re-flourished.
Yeah, he's peaked
by Bo Nix, because even with the 10 touchdown season he had with Russell Wilson last year, there were a lot of voices nationally and here in Broncos country that were like, yeah, Courtland Sutton's maybe play even midway through this season. It was like Courtland Sutton's probably played his last down in Denver, and now it's like, I don't think you can let this guy go.
And just to be fair to Court, because he deserves all of the fairness given what he's given to Broncos country, the playbook Russell Wilson was running was very limited on wide receiver routes, and I assume that was probably the same for the first month or two of a rookie quarterback. So that's probably why Court really flourished the back half of this season.
And so running back to me is the number one need. I agree with you on the wide receiver need, and I think it's kind of an interesting debate as to whether tight end or wide receiver lands in that number 2 spot from my perspective, because while they do need a secondary pass catcher, you need somebody that can stretch the field and put a threat on both sides of the ball so that teams can't just eliminate Courtland Sutton, who, albeit while having decent statistical production, is not a top tier threat at the position when you look league wide. And the tight end, the Broncos haven't been able to cover a tight end in a decade. They really haven't found, outside of Julius Thomas, a tight end that can produce at an elite level in longer than a decade.
Yeah.
So and the impact that can have from a pass catching standpoint, as well as a blocking standpoint, and the things that you can do schematically and formation wise to be able to make it harder on a defense to defend you. The tight end does an excellent job at stretching that complexity wise. So,
well, and by the way, talking about starters for multiple years, the tight end seems to have as much longevity as basically any position in football outside of quarterback. These guys that are elite tight ends, I've been drafting them into my fantasy league for the last 10 years, right? Like Mark Andrews has been on the board. Travis Kelce's been on the board, besides Brock Bowers. So, I do worry with, can a rookie tight end make an impact right away, Richie? That's one of my concerns. But after listening to Sean Payton talk for 2 years about what he's looking for, every single one of his press conferences I've more or less listened to, he brings up the term joker a lot, a guy who can do a lot of different things in your offense. What did Tyler Warren do at Penn State? He took snaps as a quarterback at times. He lined up as a running back. He did QB sneaks. He did all this stuff. And by the way, he was a kick-ass tight end.
Yep. And for the record, on the notion of joker, because we've speculated what position that would be, the only position, in my opinion, that I don't want the joker role for Sean Payton to be is running back. I think you need a running back that can be a straight line between the tackles, masher, and somebody that can catch the ball out of the backfield. I don't think you need to get cute about where you can line them up. But tight end, to your point, because of the versatility that we see in that position, as far back as the likes of Jimmy Graham lining up at wide receiver, to the degree where he got into an argument with the team and the league with the collective bargaining agreement about wanting to be franchise tagged as a receiver because of the percentage of snaps he lined up outside the line of scrimmage.
You mentioned Gesicki. He lined up at 88% of his snaps 3 years ago, wide receiver. Like, some of these guys are just wide receivers. So that's why I wanted to circle back to this. So let's throw the graphic up one more time with Mel Kiper's mock draft, because I want to ask you if Mel Kiper's mock draft, which it won't, even his last mock draft, it won't end up being gospel in terms of what happens. But in his debut mock draft, if the board falls this way and you see Tyler Warren go off the board at 14 to the Indianapolis Colts or before 20, and the Broncos select Ashton Genty with the likes of Emeka Ibuka, a top wide receiver, which is a position of need for the Broncos, and Colston Loveland, different style of tight end than Tyler Warren, but still a productive tight end in his own right, you would feel blank about the Broncos selecting Ashton Genty given the way that board fell. Disappointed.
Okay.
Like, it was a waste of assets, because Ashton Genty to me is a great college running back. But to me, there are 3 running backs in the Big 12 who you can get later in this draft who are probably going to be just as good at the next level. That is Cam Scatterbo, DJ Giddens, and Devin Neal. I mean, I'd rather the Broncos trade down and draft 2 of those guys than draft one Ashton Genty. If you look at Ashton Genty's stats when they played power conference foes a little less good. And I watched his 2 games against UNLV in a couple back-to-back weeks. And all the time in the NFL, especially late in the season, the Broncos are going to meet the Chiefs in week 14, then week 18 again, or something like that. And UNLV had a game plan in both of those games that was just, we're going to put 8 in the box and we're going to stop Boise State. Part of the limitations was the fact that Boise State didn't really have a pass attack, but those Ashton Genty yards per carry were down around 3 or 4. They were very pedestrian for a college running back. Almost anyone can do it. Meanwhile, you have in the Big 12, which is by far a better conference, you had 3 different running backs completely going off almost every single week. Yeah, they weren't chasing rushing records, but they were doing incredible things, and they were better pass catchers than Genty, who barely showed any of that ability in college. So to me, I don't think Ashton Genty is a generational running back when he gets to the next level. Not like a Saquon Barkley, who obviously deserved to go number 2 based off what we've seen the last 10 years in the NFL. To me, Ashton Genty is more of a Melvin Gordon.
Interesting comparison. Boy, that would make me nervous. That would make me, use your word, that would make me very disappointed for the Broncos to select a guy at 20th overall. And his ceiling as a professional player is Melvin Gordon, who was had no shortage of controversy, and discussion during his time here. So I think I don't know if I would go out of the gate and say disappointed, because there's a chance that it hits. And if Ashton Genty is the same caliber of player at the NFL level that he is in college, you're talking about a slam dunk. So I think I would be maybe intrigued, or nervous would have been the word that I chose, because of the risk factors that you had said. But frankly, I think I could make those same counter arguments against myself that they selected Tyler Warren, because the likelihood that you get a Brock Bowers is significantly lower than the likelihood that you get like an Evan Ingram or a Kyle Pitts for the first couple years of his career. Still basically, even though I draft him on my fantasy team almost every other year, and I just never learned.
You're that guy,
I guess. Yeah, I mean, if he's there, but anyways.
But to me, with Tyler Warren, I don't expect him to be Brock Bowers, but I do expect him to be a really good tight end in this league. Brock Bowers is going to be a historic tight end, an all-time tight end, particularly with what we've seen his first year. Literally had a better receiving year than Puka Nacua as a rookie.
Yeah, all-time great tight end, all-time awful hairline.
True. And he didn't even have a quarterback, by the way. So it was incredible. So yeah, the chances are that, maybe your running back, there's a higher floor, but ultimately there's a way higher ceiling with the tight end, especially with how long they're going to last. Because the reality of the situation with most running backs, they're not going to last more than 5-6 years. And you're going to be right back in this situation trying to find a guy for Bo. To me, this is your chance to perhaps maybe get a rookie running back, and maybe even also get a veteran running back as well. Whether it's a guy like Tony Pollard or something like that, who isn't going to excite a lot of fans, but can do a lot of things still in the NFL, probably could rush for 1,000 yards. So I'm not investing a lot in the running back position. I just don't believe that we've seen this giant shift this year where it's worth it. Like, look at Chuba Hubbard with the Panthers. He was awesome. They still stunk. If Saquon Barkley's on the Giants,
they've got Jonathan Brooks in the wings, who never even got to play much this season, and he's supposed to be the next heir apparent to Chuba Hubbard.
Trey Benson didn't play for the Cardinals this year because of James Conner. So we barely saw Tank Bigsby last year because of ETN, and then Tank Bigsby comes on in year 2. We didn't see much of a lot of these rookie running backs in their first year, and I think the Broncos are in a win now mode already with Bo. So to me, I would rather use the upside on a wide receiver. Again, if Warren's there, to me that's the guy. But the name that I look to, and this is projected at number 12 in the ESPN Mel Kiper draft in this mock that we're currently going over, it's Luther Burden from Missouri.
Okay.
And he's been projected to go to the Broncos by other people. He's been falling somewhere between 25 and 10. It's all the pre-draft process. No one really knows until the combine. But he's a guy that absolutely lit apart the SEC 2 years ago in his second season as a sophomore. Last year, not as good because of Missouri wasn't as good of a football team, but he's a guy who makes some of the most ridiculous catches you've seen. To me, he's the second best receiver in this class behind Tet McMillan, and that counts Travis Hunter in my book. Travis Hunter can just play corner too, so it's a little bit different of an equation. So to me, Luther Burden's your guy, and I think he completely changes the fortunes of the Broncos. I think he can be a guy. I'm not going to say Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, but he is a number one wide receiver in the NFL. And to me, there's a higher chance of Luther Burden being a number one wide receiver than Ashton Genty being a all-pro Saquon Barkley level running back.
Luther Burden, a name that I'm going to mentally etch down here. And the good news is this is just the beginning of mock draft season. And with the amount
That's the good news?
With the amount of people, it's good news for people like us who love to analyze and speculate and study and things of that nature. But we may have to just implement like a mock draft Monday or something, because all of these different outlets and different people and draft experts from all over the country, they all have the opportunity to pour their observations together and put their own thoughts out there. And then it's all compiled in ways that you can look at it side by side. Just another wonder of the internet. But in terms of players who are already on the roster, we got an interesting nugget about Patrick Surtain II this morning. He was awarded by the Pro Football Writers Association. Important note there, that is not the Associated Press designation of the award, which is what will be revealed during the NFL honors ceremony during Super Bowl week. But the Pro Football Writers Association named Patrick Surtain the Defensive Player of the Year. We've been talking about it throughout the backstretch of the season as he kind of carried steam. He was the prospective favorite for good chunks of the season, and I think he finished the season at that. He is, I think, a player who is kind of blossoming a little bit slower than maybe we here locally would like to give credit for, because it takes time for nationally because of how bad the Broncos have been for that attention to get there. I think Nick Bonito is kind of going to experience.
I mean, he's a deep boy on a rookie contract, Richie.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I'm saying we were shouting that from the rooftops after like 4 games of his rookie season.
Yeah.
Whereas it's kind of taken some time for him to get that kind of love nationally. Among the league, it was quick, but among the national media and the awards getters, I think it took a little bit of time. And there was the silly, in hindsight, debate between Sauce Gardner and Patrick Surtain and all of that, because we couldn't just give it to PS2. There had to be a
New York media market.
New York media market, exactly. So with Patrick Surtain being awarded this by the Pro Football Writers Association, how many times do you think in the last 24 years, because we don't know about 25 yet, that the Defensive Player of the Year from the PFWA differs from who actually wins the AP award at the end of the season?
I'm assuming you have the answer, and I'm just making a guess. I'm going to say 3.
Right on the money. Johnny on the spot 3 times in the last 24 seasons, and I have them listed there for you. In 2017, the Pro Football Writers Association awarded the DPOY to Calais Campbell, familiar face here in Colorado.
Our guy.
It was awarded to Aaron Donald of the Rams, which I believe made it his second consecutive at that time.
Mm-hmm.
In 2013, Robert Quinn of the Rams was awarded it early by the PFWA. Luke Kuechly ends up winning it, one of the more curious NFL players in terms of what could have been, up there with Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin III and others. In 2010, Clay Matthews was given the award on the early side, and Troy Polamalu won it in the AP. Now, it sets up kind of an interesting dynamic. History would tell you that more often than not, whoever is awarded it by the Pro Football Writers Association mirrors the AP selection at the end of the year. So more likely than not, at this point in time, Patrick Surtain is going to finish the season as the NFL's AP Defensive Player of the Year. My question that I was going back and forth with my head and with some of our guys down the hall here is, whose opinion do you put more stock in? The Associated Press is by and large considered kind of a gold standard from a journalistic standpoint in the sports world in terms of their credibility and all of that stuff. But the Pro Football Writers Association has, while it may not have the same pedigree from an organizational standpoint, it's not an outlet individually. It's a collection or a guild of writers that are amassed from all over the place. You could argue that there are more opportunities for people who cover the league more closely and potentially more accurately to be in that group than the AP group. What says you?
Yeah, I'm an AP guy. I mean, I write an AP style every single day on Denver Sports.
That is true. There's no PFWA style.
Correct. I mean, yes, I work for the Associated Press. I'm pretty biased on this one. So I understand what you're saying, because the other guys are more football experts, where these guys are more just sports, special, all around generalists. But what I'll say is, because of the awards history, to me, one of these awards we're going to remember, one of them we're not. It's the one that's awarded by the actual NFL on a stage because of its specialty, its history, its credence. But, whether Surtain wins it or not, he's either the best defender of football or the second best defender in football.
Shucks.
I mean, Surtain should care, and he cares. And I understand fans want the achievements. Like, I want Jokic to win every MVP. I get it. But ultimately, in terms of team success and what it matters for the Broncos' future moving forward, this is meaningless. All you need to know is that Pat Surtain is an awesome defender. And this year, the first chance he really had to prove it or had a chance to prove it because the defense was good enough around him where teams actually had to throw the ball his way. He showed that he was worth every single penny Denver just paid him. So
a much maligned, in some eyes, pick at the time for passing on the likes of Justin Fields when the Broncos had a clear need for a quarterback and taking Patrick Surtain. That was definitely a hotly contested debate here in the market. You brought up Nikola Jokic. Do you think that if Pat Surtain is snubbed for this award, that it could potentially be the genesis of the grassroots coalition, pitchfork and lantern campaign that we saw develop around Nikola Jokic when he was consistently snubbed for MVP before, winning it during the COVID season?
Yeah, I think with Jokic, he's a more lightning rod figure to attract to just because he's
the anti-NBA superstar.
Correct. And partly because they're literally almost naked on the floor. You know everything about a basketball player. You get intimate relationships with them. Whereas PS2's out there kind of hidden, right? He's in a helmet. He plays a position that if he's doing his job, you're only going to see 2 or 3 times a game. Right. So I think it's a lot different, but I do think, especially with the bravado of Broncos country, and deservingly so in this case, there could definitely be a grassroots campaign where all next season, that's all we hear talked about. Because to this day, and I think for the rest of Denver sports history, and exactly on this day, particularly given what happened in Denver last night, I think a lot of people are still upset with what happened with the MVP 2 years ago in the NBA.
Broncos country, and really Colorado sports fans in general, in my opinion, rarely miss an opportunity to shout from a bully pulpit about issues that affect them.
Shout from the mountaintops, yes. Richie. It's right there.
And in a weird way, it almost feels like you have to respect that. As it relates to the two teams that play in Ball Arena, quickly, I will just mention that Jared Bednar's put it out there earlier today that Val Nichushkin suffered a setback in his recovery and is now being relegated back to a week-to-week status instead of like a could be here any day.
So he was day-to-day 22 days ago, but now he's week-to-week.
Yes. Yeah. So that should tell you from a terminology standpoint where things stand. And it just feels like I think just because of past trauma, a lot of us Avs fans were ready for the word setback to make a headline. I just think we all thought it was going to come from Gabe Landeskog because that's how it's gone the last handful of years. As soon as he gets close, there's a setback. So we got the Val setback before the Gabe setback, but it's still setback season.
Setback season like that. 2025 setback season. Not funny in a oh my God, this is awesome way, but like funny in a particular way is for the last 5 years, we've done this exact show and we're going to continue to do this show, which is who's closer to a title, the Nuggets or Avs?
Yep.
And again, this season, just like the one before, it seems like every 2 weeks this flips. Because if you asked me 2-3 weeks ago, it's like the Avs are red hot. They've got everything figured out. Val's going to come back. Everything's fine. They finally figured it out. If you ask me today, the Avs aren't consistent. But you look at the Nuggets right now, and they're just rolling. Like it literally changes every 2 weeks. And hopefully, Richie, when we get to the postseason, both these teams can be the answer. Yes. And they're playing consistently.
And it feels like those two, the neck and neck, the edging out depends on two like very familiar, frustrating factors for the Avs. It's always been the status of Valeri Nichushkin, who's gone AWOL for unfortunate reasons in a handful of postseasons. And we knock on whatever service is necessary that all of that is behind him and that he's okay. And the goaltending situation. Well, with the addition of Mackenzie Blackwood and even Scott Wedgwood, it feels like that hole in the ship is much more plugged than it's been in a long time. But we still have this Valeri Nichushkin thing, and there's a very real fear, I feel like, among Avalanche fans that setback season could turn into suspension season because if there's injury complications and things like that, which leads to pain management, which has led to certain other things. And again, that's complete, that there's no reporting of that. That's just complete, fear and speculation based on things that have happened in the past. And we genuinely hope that that's not the case. But as it relates to the Nuggets, as you mentioned, rolling. And the issue with them has been, surviving the non-Jokic minutes, getting quality bench production. And is Jamal Murray ever going to be champion Murray ever again? And Jamal had that breakout performance, 45 points a handful of games ago. And, it seemed like there's been some positive momentum in that direction. And the non-Jokic minutes, the bench production has been a lot better lately. And I think a lot of that, or at least some of that, has been spurred by the minutes restrictions placed on Aaron Gordon, which has found him coming off the bench. And I got to say, Jake, I like the way that it looks. I like the way that it flows. I like that it does, but I'm not naive enough to not acknowledge that Aaron Gordon is not coming off the bench in the playoffs. So what is the best course of action for a guy like Michael Malone, who is watching it unfold in front of him as the Nuggets are just humming? And it has to do with this unique kind of lineup combination, but it's probably not going to be that way in the playoffs. How does a guy like Michael Malone, or how should he balance that?
Well, do you know the Nuggets record right now in the 22 games that Russell Westbrook started?
No, I don't. I remember they were 9-2 in their first 11, but I don't know about the record since that 11.
They're 17-5.
Wow.
Yeah, they're a beast. And part of that is because of the scheduling, and the couple games that Russell Westbrook has started have been against non-playoff teams. Part of it is because they've just found their stride as a team when Russ has been starting, whether that's actually Russ or, causation, correlation. It's hard to figure out. What I will tell you is I did this on Tuesday's Mile High Hoops podcast. I looked at January of the championship season when the Nuggets really took off. They went on a 9-game streak. I think they won like 14 of 16 at one point. It was just awesome. Right now, the Nuggets have won 11 of their last 14. All 11 wins by double digits. 2 of those games, Nikola Jokic didn't play, and they were both losses. So basically, 11 of the last 12 games that Nikola Jokic played, the Nuggets have won by double digits. They are murdering teams. You look at the net rating, which is a very simple stat for those who don't understand net rating. It's basically 100 possessions. If you took 100 possessions, because a lot of different basketball games, there's different amounts of possessions. So 100 possessions. How many points do you outplay your opponents by in those 100 possessions? So in the last 19 games, the Nuggets are second in the NBA in net rating. I looked at it yesterday on my podcast. I don't have last night's number. I'm sorry. But over the last 15 games, the Nuggets are 9.6 points better than our opponents over 100 possessions. During January of their title season, they were 8 points per game better per 100 possessions. So right now, the Nuggets, it's fair to say, are playing better than at any point that the Nuggets did during their championship season, during the regular season. The difference is, Richie, is that 8.0 number was best in the NBA 2 years ago in the month of January. The 9.6 number over the last 15 games is third in the NBA behind the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So
the rising tide has lifted more than just the Nuggets boat.
Correct. And at some points, it does feel like kind of like a death march for the Nuggets, where it's just like we know the incinerator at the end of the road is waiting for them, which is the Oklahoma City Thunder. And if they get far enough, the Cavs, who kicked the Nuggets' butt twice this season. But you never know who's going to get hurt, and you never know what thing might go awry in whatever NBA city. For instance, today, Derek Lively was announced as out for the next 2 to 3 months with a broken foot. That takes him right up to the start of the playoffs. 3 months from now is the start of the playoffs. And that's a pretty key injury, particularly if Dallas matches up with Denver. And by the way, they're right next to each other in the standings. So you never know what's going to happen. And if you base what's gone on with the Nuggets over the last month and a half and project forward and the continued growth, I'm really high about the Nuggets right now. I think clearly they're the second best team in the West. I think clearly they're the fourth best team in the NBA behind the Cavs, Thunder, and Celtics. So I'm really high in the Nuggets. I'm talking about them like people are upset, and they're not number one.
Yeah.
We're a little spoiled. They're in the top 5. They're one of the 5 best teams in the league. And a lot of that success has come back to Russell Westbrook's in the starting lineup. Jamal Murray's playing shooting guard. Russ has done everything that's been asked of him. I could not be higher on him given where I was, especially coming into the season. But I'm also the guy that was so low on Russ because of how bad he was in the playoffs, because of his shooting historically has not played out well. And when you have Russ, Christian Brown, and Aaron Gordon on the floor together, especially in the playoffs when teams are game planning against you, I don't know if that spacing is going to work. And a lot of the Nuggets' success this year has been built off the fact that they get out and run and in the fast break, and they're such a good fast break team. Last night particularly, they scored like 20 baskets just because of Christian Brown was running.
They had 18 transition fast break points in the first quarter, which is the amount that the Philadelphia 76ers average in an entire game.
And you
season.
just don't do that in the playoffs, Richie. So it's a different game. So I worry about what happens when the game slows down. But I looked at it again yesterday in the Mile High Hoops podcast. In the month of January, their title season, they were getting 99 possessions a game. That was their pace, 99 possessions a game. Right now, during their season, the last 15-game stretch that I keep talking about, they're getting 98 possessions a game. They have slowed down and found success in slower situations as of late. And Russell Westbrook is shooting a career high from the corners. I think it's like 45%. It's like a ludicrous amount. So I'm actually of the belief that the Nuggets should probably continue to roll this starting five for a variety of reasons until the All-Star break and then reassess then. Aaron Gordon probably isn't going to be playing 35 minutes a night until then anyway. And with you only playing 22 minutes a night, it makes a lot more sense to play 2 11-minute stretches than to play 4 stretches of, I can't do the math because I'm bad at math, but 4 stretches of like 8 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever it might be, right? It just doesn't work that well with your rotation. So especially given the fact that come playoff time, a lot of Aaron Gordon's minutes are going to come with Julian Strawther in the bench. I think it's really cool that they're developing their chemistry right now. And by the way, on top of all of this, the best 5-man lineup in the NBA by net rating who have played over 100 possessions together this season, it's the Nuggets' current starting 5 with Christian, Aaron, Mike, Jamal, and Nikola.
Wow. Yeah, Aaron Gordon, 19 points and 3 triples last night. Career night for Julian Strawther, 23 points and 5 triples. And it just, obviously, Jokic is the sun. He is the center of the Denver basketball universe. But it really just goes to show you, if the Nuggets can present different looks and different things with Russell Westbrook playing, at a relatively efficient level and avoiding some of the turnovers that we know he's been prone to, while maintaining a high shooting percentage and allowing the distribution for Jamal Murray to showcase his 3-point shooting more, playing the 2 guard and things like that. And then you've got the staggering of Aaron Gordon and guys like Julian Strawther kind of coming into their own, and Christian Brown. It really just does go to show you that it feels like there is a chance for the Nuggets to, recapture some of that energy and some of that synergy that they clearly had during the title run, even if it just manifests itself a little bit differently. And I don't think that you can take all of that away from a game against the 76ers where they blew the doors off of them. And frankly, you knew it was going to go bad when like 5 or 6 minutes into the game, Nick Nurse has to call a timeout and basically ask, does anyone want to play basketball?
So by the way, because these rumors persist this summer, how excited are you that Paul George isn't on your basketball team right now?
I've never been more excited. I've never wanted him to be on my basketball team. And I think that as we become accustomed to here in Denver, we didn't get to see Joel Embiid come back. The last time that he played here in Denver was November of 2019, and
21-point comeback in the fourth quarter from the Nuggets in that game. Nikola Jokic, game winner over Embiid. I never not talk about that because it literally walked Joel Embiid off of the floor.
Yeah.
In Denver for the Nuggets.
Jake, I put a list together of things that have happened since Joel Embiid last played in Denver, Colorado. And I just wanted to know if you had added anything to that list. We've seen a global pandemic. We have seen 2 presidential elections. TikTok died and came back to life.
That's happened this week.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying it happened. The Nuggets won a world championship after the Avs won a Stanley Cup. Jokic had 3 MVP seasons in 4 years, when at the time he had not had one since Joel Embiid last played. And the Broncos started 10 different quarterbacks during the span of which Joel Embiid last played here in Denver to today. 10. Did I miss anything?
How many times have the Colorado Rockies lost a baseball game?
Oh my gosh, I don't think we have enough space. That's a lot of zeros.
It might be 400. It might be 400.
It's you're approaching a nickel there potentially.
Yeah. So for me, I looked at the lineup in that game last night because I always just I still can't believe it. I've seen Joel Embiid play basketball twice in person. I've been lucky enough to catch him twice in person. Mm-hmm. One was in Boulder in 2013 when the Colorado Buffaloes upset the Kansas Jayhawks on a buzzer beater. And again, that Jokic game in 2019. And then Embiid played one other time in his NBA career before that in Denver, before he was really Joel Embiid. The thing that comes back to me is Al Horford was playing for the Philadelphia 76ers in that game because it was just after his first run with the Boston Celtics with Kyrie Irving, but it was before he was so bad the 76ers had to ship him out of town to Oklahoma City, who took the cap hit, cut him, and then he became Al Horford again on the Boston Celtics. Like, Al Horford's gone through like 3 different portions of his career, all in the span of this Joel Embiid not playing in Denver.
I won't put gospel to it, but I was reading because that's a sentiment.
Victor Wembanyama was in middle school, by the way.
I want to say Victor. I didn't know that one. He was in middle school. I want to say Tyrese Maxey might have been in high school. Yeah. And Paul Millsap was like a prominent starter on the Nuggets roster.
He was their starting power forward.
Yeah, at that time. So it was an entirely different NBA world.
Will Barton was a very important part of the Nuggets on that year.
Entirely different world from a global perspective. The last time we were graced by the presence of Joel Embiid, the Ducker, as some are dubbing him, here in Denver. You brought up the Colorado Buffaloes, and I just got to say, I don't know. I'm sure you have, because you're again as tapped in as anybody. But I read Mike Singer's new book, Why So Serious? The Untold Story of NBA Champion Nikola Jokic, and I couldn't put it down. And his in-depth insight. So, shout out, unnecessary plug for Mike Singer there, because it's an awesome book.
Oh, it's a necessary plug.
Everyone should read it. But I went down that wormhole, and it's made me fascinated with all of the behind the scenes information and his kind of peek into the world that is Eastern European and really just international basketball. I'm fascinated by the dynamics that are at play with that. I know it's something that you know a lot about and spent a lot of time studying.
Yeah.
And that led me recently to go down a wormhole for the likes of Yegor Demin, who plays for the BYU Cougars and is a guy, he's one of the highest rated recruits. He was in Boulder last night, highest rated recruits in BYU history. He's a guy that was born in Russia, left Russia at the age of 15 to move to Spain to play for Real Madrid, which at the time for a Russian player, not very common, and ends up, signing a 6-year deal with them, eventually makes his way to BYU. And now he's here. And if and when he declares for the draft, he will be one of, the top lottery potential prospects.
He's projected to go 10 by
He'll be a top rated prospect, at least right now. Now, injuries have kind of hit him a little bit, and they've struggled a little bit with him. He didn't play particularly well in Boulder last night, although BYU kind of
He didn't need to,
because you got the guys like Richie Saunders, shout out, great name, going off for 25 points and kind of pacing the team with that. But Jake, I just, again, all with the genesis being Mike Singer's book on Nikola Jokic and the backstory there, with everything Nikola went through from the time he was a child, essentially, to being molded and crafted into the superstar that he's blossomed into today. I feel like I'm just implicitly on the lookout for the next potential guy who could attempt to follow that mold. And I'm not saying that Yegor Demin in particular is that, but just the dynamics at play of a 15-year-old kid having to move halfway across the world to play the game of basketball by themselves a lot of the time. It just makes me look at what you and I were probably doing when we were 15 years old, eating on, Lunchables and having our parents, pick us up from practice, to these guys who are taking such serious life steps. I'm fascinated by all of it.
Yeah. And again, not to diminish what Demon's going through or what Jokic might have gone through, but this happens in professional hockey with almost every top prospect.
That's true.
They move away from their families. Connor Bedard did it. Cale Makar, I think at one point did it. Almost every top hockey player does this. Even in basketball, the AAU circuit, a lot of guys are torn from their families and they go play prep school or something else. So this is part of the commitment of being this level of athlete. That's simply the mentality of which me and you and people watching this probably will never understand. It is great always to watch great basketball players play in Boulder. I referenced me seeing Joel Embiid playing in Boulder. I still remember DeAndre Ayton coming into Boulder, Aaron Gordon coming into Boulder. So many really great basketball players. So it was fun to see that last night. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there because I had to be at the Nuggets game.
True. Can only be so many places.
I was literally in Boulder at 7:30, and I was like, all right, I got to make my decision. And I chose Nuggets because they have the best basketball player in the world. So that trumps almost every time.
It's rivalry week.
Because, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, but like my favorite team in the entire world is CU men's basketball. I am like one of the 7 sickos. So 39-6 run to kill the Buffs in the middle of that game. Shout out to my boy Oliver Hayes, one of my students, does a great job covering that team. But yeah, I read his story, and it's just like so depressing where that program is right now, especially given last year. And I was in Indy for that amazing shot by KJ Simpson. And, you know, 3 of those guys are in the NBA. De Silva's absolutely killing it for the Magic right now, starting in place of Wagner. So it was so fun. And next year, CU's got such a great class coming in, and they'll be back in the men's basketball thing. But moving to the Big 12, and I talked about it nonstop, even on the show, it's just going to kill the men's basketball program. They're 0-7 in conference. It's the worst start under Tad Boyle.
Yep. And I don't think it's happened since I think 2016 when they lost their first 7 Pac-12 games when they first moved to the Pac-12.
And I think 6 of those 7 were on the road or something absurd, which those road Pac-12 games were a nightmare too. Yeah. But this has been at home for the Buffs in the Big 12.
Well, brighter days hopefully are on the horizon for the Buffs as it relates to the hardwood. And Jake, I got to be honest, I feel like we've gone for 50 minutes now. I just looked at the clock for the first time, and I feel like I could probably go 50 more with you. But I think that is where we will leave it for today. A lot of interesting things to come speculation-wise as it relates to Broncos country. We've got genuine playoff and title aspirations happening at Ball Arena with the Avs and the Nuggets. And we're going to find out where a lot of our prominent, beloved CU Buffs, especially on the football side, end up in the NFL here in March. So all of it to come, and we'll be on top of it. I know you will be at denversports.com. You and Will and Cecil and Mace and James and everybody does such a great job there.
I have a deep dive coming out on the Nuggets starting lineup later today. So
all right.
They're there to answer your question that we talked about today.
Little tease there. So be sure to check out denversports.com, the Denver Sports app, like and subscribe on YouTube at Denver Sports 1043. And we will see you tomorrow.